Not only am I going to show you how to create the classic French macaron, but I'm going to create it in the shape of a bunny rabbit with a beautiful honey ganache filling. Going to start with the milk chocolate honey ganache because this takes about 2 hours to set and it doesn't take us that long to create the macaron shell. So we've got some fresh cream here, which we're going to boil together with some honey and vanilla. A little bit of honey, if you want to put some leatherwood or some manuka honey, something with a little bit of flavour, you can. Tiny bit of vanilla bean paste. It's one of my favourite ingredients. I'm going to bring this to a boil and then we're going to pour it over the milk chocolate. Once the cream comes to a boil, pour it over your good quality milk chocolate. If you're using a block, just roughly chop it up. I always think block's a little bit safer because you're not going to eat or take handfuls of the buttons. It's always tempting with buttons to just eat them as they are. We whisk that just until all the chocolate's melted and it comes together. And this is what we call a ganache. So a ganache is an emulsion or mixture between liquid and chocolate. So it can be milk, it can be orange juice, it can be water. And here we've used cream. All the chocolate's melted and have a look at that beautiful consistency. Next step, we place plastic wrap on the surface of the ganache to avoid it getting a skin and also to help stop any moisture evaporating from the ganache. We're going to leave this at room temperature. You can place it in the fridge if your room temperature is really hot, but it's going to go firm very, very quickly. So room temperature for about an hour and a half to 2 hours. Now for the macaron component. So for the macaron, there's a few tips and tricks that I can share with you that'll ensure that you get the perfect finish on your macarons. The first one is that you have to age your egg white. So your egg white, the older, the better. Crack your egg whites and separate them from the yolk. Ensure that you've got none of the yolk in the white. And what I do is I put the egg white in a spaghetti colander and I leave it for 24 hours at room temperature. And I only weigh what comes out underneath. This is called liquefying or clarifying your egg whites. So we've got 2 lots of egg whites. I do that with both. And this ensures that we evaporate some of the moisture from the egg white and we have a higher concentration of protein, which will give us a much more stable meringue. So we place 1 lot of egg white into the mixing bowl. The next trick to making the perfect macaron is the preparation of your almond meal and icing sugar. We call this TPT or tant pour tant. The almond meal that we get here in Australia isn't very refined and you can see that it's quite coarse there. So it actually has to be a little bit finer when we're creating macarons. So I combine it together with the icing sugar and place it into a food processor. It's important at this stage that it doesn't become hot. If it becomes too hot, the oil will come out of the almond, so you want it still to be a powder. As soon as you've done that, you're going to sieve them together into a bowl, and that's what we've got here. But if you look closely, you can see that the almond is much finer. We're creating what we call an Italian meringue macaron. So you can use a French meringue, you can use a Swiss meringue, or Italian. Italian meringue macarons may be a little bit more work at the start, but they're much more stable and more likely to turn out perfectly than a French meringue or a Swiss meringue. For an Italian meringue macaron, we're going to boil some sugar syrup. We always put the water in the saucepan first, followed by the sugar. Make sure your sugar is clean and hasn't got a little bit of flour or any impurities in there. I've got here some cream of tartar. You can also use salt, vinegar, or lemon juice. What the cream of tartar does is it gives us a much creamier egg white and it's less likely to separate the protein and water. You can get this quite easily, and what I love about cream of tartar, it has no flavour. I'm going to boil the sugar and water together till it reaches 118 degrees Celsius. How I test that when it's ready is I take a small amount out of the boiling saucepan, drop it in a bowl of cold water, and it should make a soft, pliable ball. If it dissolves and you can't form a ball, it means that it's actually got too much water in it and it's too cold. If it's too firm and the ball's not pliable, it means you've gone a little bit far, but you can rectify it by adding a little bit of water. So I always have a cup of water handy when I'm boiling the sugar and water, so I can pour some more water in if it's going too quickly, because we need to add this to the egg white when it's whipped. So if your syrup is at 118 and your egg whites aren't whipped, add a couple of teaspoons of water and it needs to evaporate that water before coming back to temperature. I'm just going to start whipping the egg white on a slow speed while we start preparing the sugar. As soon as the sugar starts to boil, I'm going to increase the speed on the mixer. Now you saw when I poured the syrup in, the trick is not to hit the whisk and not to hit too much of the bowl so it runs in between the whisk and the bowl. You can also use a hand mixer to do this, one hand to pour and one hand to mix. Whisk it until you can touch the bowl comfortably and then we turn it off and you can just let that sit at room temperature for 20 minutes, half an hour or so while we prepare the almond base. So I have here the refined almond meal and icing sugar. Our second lot of egg white. This will make it a really thick, dense paste. If you want to add colour, I'm not adding any colour at all, but if you wanted to, you would add it into the meringue just before you stop mixing. And it's always better with macarons to use a bake stable colour, which are generally pastes and gels. That's our almond base ready. Now we can gradually add in our Italian meringue. Look at the consistency of that. It's absolutely perfect. If I do say so myself, a bit of self-praise. It's shiny and glossy, which means we've got a really tight structure, which is great for a meringue. Add in a small amount at the start, maybe just a tiny bit more. This is just to ensure that we don't have any lumps in the almond base. Consistency for the start of our base. I'm going to change now to what we call a plastic scraper, a dough scraper, because it's a little bit firmer. You can keep going with these silicone spatulas, but it makes it a lot faster and easier with something a little bit firmer. I'm going to add in now the remaining meringue. Now this is called macarooning the mix. So we're going to combine the meringue with the almond base. And normally when we're working with meringue, we're very delicate to ensure that we don't knock out all the air. With macarons, it's the absolute opposite. We want to soften it enough so it starts to spread slightly. If we have a look at the mixture now, you can see it holds and it's not actually spreading. So what we're wanting it to do, if I stop mixing, in 2 minutes, it should level itself out. So we're certainly not there yet, so I'm going to continue to mix. Now, if you don't age your egg whites, your macarons will actually crack during baking. So that's a really essential step to let them come to room temperature and sit out for 24 hours before weighing them. So let's have a test now and see if it's dropping. So you can see it's dropping a little bit more. If we pipe it and it's not flowing enough, we're going to get little peaks on our macarons. So I'd say we're nearly there, a tiny bit more. Now you can over mix this. If you mix this too much, it's going to all spread out and your macarons are going to join together. So I think we're nearly there. You may not be able to see it, but it is slowly moving and spreading to the sides. What they do in big manufacturing is they actually mark the bowl on the side and they know when the macaron mixture hits that marker that they've mixed it enough. The macaron mixture is leveling out nicely, so we can now get ready to pipe. On the computer, I searched for bunny heads and then I've printed some sheets off and I'm using that as a template underneath a baking mat. You can also use baking paper for macarons. I find you get a much better result though from a baking mat because sometimes with the silicone on baking paper, it can distort the macaron shape a little bit. So macarons are one thing that you must pipe. You can't do it with a spoon or a knife, anything like that. So to get a really nice finish and result, you're going to have to pipe it. I'm using a 10mm piping nozzle to do the head of the rabbit, and then I'm going to be using an 8mm piping nozzle to do the ears. You can also use a 10. I like them a little bit thinner. Roll the top of the piping bag down, place the piping nozzle in. Can use a cloth bag as well. Then just push that into the nozzle so the macaron mixture doesn't come out. Just put enough of the macaron mixture into the bag so you can comfortably handle the bag when you're piping. And if you want to at this stage do half plain and half pink, you can colour the mixture. Just make sure you don't overwork it when you're mixing the colour through. Now I'm going to pipe the ears first. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to put the smaller nozzle over the top, only because I'm a little bit lazy and I don't want to do 2 different piping bags. And I'm going to pipe the ears first. I'm just going to hold that while I'm piping, and then I'm going to follow through by piping the heads. So just finish just inside the head part. Twist the bag as you're piping and as more of the mixture's coming out, so you've got tension and this is quite firm the whole way through, so then you'll have more control when you're piping. So push from your right hand if you're right-handed, or left if you're left-handed, and my left hand here is just here solely as a guide. We take the smaller piping nozzle off, and now we're going to pipe the heads. You'll notice that I've gone a little bit higher than the bunny ears to make them a little bit longer, but it really depends on the template that you print out. We're going to pipe the bunny head now. This is exactly how you'd pipe a macaron shell without the ears. So angle the bag slightly, and we don't move the bag around. The bag actually stays in the one position. We pipe, we stop piping, and then we twist the bag away quickly. Here comes the noisy part. So we're going to tap the tray on the bench to level the macaron out so we get rid of any sort of peaks. Twist it around so we've got an even tap on both sides. Now these are ready to go straight into the oven. Now I'm going to bake these at 145 degrees Celsius for approximately 10 to 15 minutes. Now every oven is different, that's why I've given you such a broad baking range. How we know they're ready is you should be able to actually touch the macaron shell and wiggle it from side to side, and then you know they're ready to come out. Now I think this obviously looks like a bunny's head for Easter, perfect. But if you want to embellish the bunny's head by drawing on some features, you can do so, and I'm going to show you how. So firstly, we're going to temper some milk chocolate by placing it in the microwave in a plastic bowl. You're going to heat it in 30-second increments on high until you've got half liquid, half solid chocolate, and then you're going to vigorously stir it. I'm using glass, but you're going to use plastic. I'm just using glass so you can see a little bit better what I'm doing. One of the most important things when you're tempering is to vigorously stir your chocolate. If it feels warm to touch, then it's too hot and it's not tempered. It must be below your body temperature. I'm going to use a paper piping comb to pipe the details on my bunny's face. Now we do have a YouTube video on how to create these yourself. When you're filling the bag, only fill it halfway. And then when we fold the bag, we fold away from the seam and fold the top of the bag down. Cut a small amount off the end of the bag. Then we're going to pipe on the facial features. Now this is totally up to you because I think they look really cute as they are. I should mention before you start piping that you may want to pair your rabbit heads up to make sure you've got two that almost match identically, or as close as possible. We're only going to pipe on every second macaron shell. The one that's upside down doesn't get piped on at all. For a final touch, I'm going to add a little bit of blush to the ears and the cheeks. Now I'm using a luster powder. We do sell this at Saver, but you can also get it at cake decorating stores. So just a small brush. I always find makeup brushes are the best when you're working with food because they don't tend to lose any hairs. So just a little bit of blush inside the ears. A little bit on the cheeks. So many different ways that you can finish off these rabbit heads. You can do less or you can do more. This is a great activity for the kids. This is something that kids absolutely love getting involved with. So they'll let you do all the hard work, all the making of the macarons, and they'll just come in for the fun part. Done, I'm finished with the decorating. I'm now ready to fill the macarons. You can also freeze the macarons before you decorate them without the filling in them, and then put the filling in just a couple of days before serving. So once we've got the filling in, we can keep them for 3 or 4 days in the fridge. The ganache that I made has firmed up enough to pipe. It will get to a point where it goes a little bit too firm, so don't make it more than a few hours in advance. I'm using a 1 centimetre piping tube. You can also use an 8 millimetre piping tube. Look at that, beautiful texture. This is a great recipe actually to make some truffles as well. We'll pick up every second macaron. If they do stick a little bit, they may need to go in the freezer for a while. And then we're going to pipe the ears. And then a dot of ganache in the centre. So you can keep these for 3 to 4 days in the fridge. I always like to let them sit for at least 6 hours before serving, so they've absorbed a little bit of moisture from the filling so that the macaron shell is not too crunchy. Such an amazing time with family and friends, and here's your opportunity to impress with these beautiful bunny rabbit macarons.